the people of sake actually brought me into sake.
Back in 1988, this place was actually in Ginza on the main drag.
At first it was kind of soy sauce, it was miso.
To the point where it actually changed my life.
New Year's Day 1989.
Not just sake as a beverage, but all the culture and history.
Hi, this is Frank, and you are listening to Sake on Air. I'm filling in because Justin is working at Craft Sake Week in Roppongi Hills. As you may know, in March we did 4 live shows at the Aoyama Sake Flea Festival, but we were also lucky enough to have sake samurai Andre Bishop and the CEO of Colorado Sake Company, William Stuart, sit down with us for a quick outdoor recording. I hope you guys enjoy the show this week.
All right, here we are back once again for a super duper impromptu session of Sake on Air. This is Justin Potts, one of your co-hosts, if you will, for this wee little show that we send out from Japan every other week. Next to me, I have Chris Hughes. Chris
Hello.
Hughes, how you doing, sir?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Yes.
We got up early, and it's still cloudy, and it's still cold.
Yeah. Well, I've had my coffee. I'll be all right.
You can be all right. So we are back at Aoyama Sake Flea, and back for round 2. We also have Marie. Marie, say hi.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. How we doing?
We're doing good.
You're-
Unless I have my coffee.
This impromptu session is when we come out to these festivals, we bump into all kinds of fantastic individuals that are floating around
We
enjoying sake, and that happened to work out this time around. So we have 2 stellar gentlemen here across the table from us. Right in front of me, we have Mr. William Stuart of Colorado Sake.
Yes, thanks for having me.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well.
You doing well?
Staying warm.
You staying warm, more or
Yeah.
less? Excellent, excellent. And to his left, we have Mr. Andre Bishop.
Should I pull in the Australian and go, g'day?
Please do. Please do. We try to flavor
Excellent.
the podcast.
All right. I don't have a very strong Australian accent, but I can pull off a g'day. G'day, everybody.
No, we're super lucky to have these 2 gentlemen here who are
Thank
on
you
their
very
own
much.
little adventures here in Japan, and they were kind enough to trek out bright and early before the festivities got started today, and so we thought we would pick these 2 gentlemen's brain here a little bit. Andre, what brings you out to the island?
Well, a couple of things. I started off this trip with the Miss Sake competition, so I was asked to be the director.
You were participating. You were enrolled.
I look great in a kimono. Really. So the Miss Sake organisation is wanting to expand its operations around the world to bring the sake love to more people. So I was approached to be the director of Miss Sake Australia. So we had our selection process in Australia, and then I was lucky enough to bring Stephanie Coombs, the new Australian Miss Sake, to Japan, and we enjoyed the Japanese final of Miss Sake Japan. It was on March 15. It's, I guess, trying to send that message of not just sake, but also washoku, Japanese cuisine, and also Japanese culture to other people around the world. So, I think it's a really great program for getting the word out there.
Do you have a similar situation as we do in Japan, where originally sort of sake wasn't really drunk by women very much? Like we didn't really have a big female following.
I think for most part that was the case in Australia, but now I think it's very much sort of on parity. Australians, men and women, are sort of discovering the joys of sake. So I guess we're lucky in that it doesn't have that sort of difference between the 2 drinkers. But certainly, you tend to find that the women that are introduced to sake in Australia tend to sort of at the start enjoy sweeter styles, or they're really enjoying that sort of that sparkling sake experience that I guess that was created to pitch that at that market segment.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really curious to me. So I obviously not being from Australia, and sadly not having been to Australia. Actually, that's a black
We're
mark.
going to have to
on my
rectify that. We're going to have to do
there.
Sake on Air Oz.
Done.
Okay.
I like it.
Done.
I like it. I like it. I can't imagine how, say, a program like that, I guess, would be perceived. As you were saying, as sort of Chris was saying, it was something that was very much born out of the Japanese market and its relationship
And
with
it was,
food
and I
and
did-
communications, and so they have it in the U.S. now,
Mm.
and I still don't know really how it's perceived fully in the U.S. either, and so I'm actually very curious as to how you approach something like that, because it really, I feel like it requires a bit of localization to a degree in order to implement a program like that.
You are
overseas.
totally correct, and it was a big concern of mine at the start, because I was thinking, well, I don't want to be associated with a beauty pageant, and that was probably one of the hardest things to turn people's perception around. And I think that the Miss Sake organisation in Japan has worked very hard at also saying, this is not a beauty pageant. We're looking for an individual to be a hero for sake, a hero for washoku, a hero for Japanese tourism. And I was very impressed with the applicants in Australia. I mean, we had a lot of amazing professional women who loved Japan and wanted to share their love with Japan with their fellow Australians. So I was really kind of really impressed by the quality of the candidates. I mean, we had lawyers. It was a whole sort of cross range of professionals, account executives. But in the end, we chose Stephanie because she genuinely had an amazing love of Japan and had used her skills in journalism to write stories about Japan. She's regularly on national radio. So for us, that was a great person that could get out there and help Australians understand how fantastic sake is and also how fantastic Japan is. So for us, Stephanie was a great match. But it was certainly worrying at the start, going, well, how am I going to deliver this message that we're looking for a woman who's a hero for Japan, and it's not a beauty contest. There's no bikinis involved.
And we were talking about somebody just kind of being a champion for Japanese food, for sake, and for the culture and things like that. Not so different from a samurai.
Yes.
Yeah.
We actually we kind of jumped right over your introduction here a little bit. Why don't we step back real briefly, and why don't you tell people what it is that keeps you busy down there in Melbourne?
I wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
So I guess first and foremost, I was a sake fan, but then I was a restaurateur. So I have Japanese venues down in Melbourne. I've got two reasonably large izakayas, a sake bar, and a little takeaway sushi bar side project. So I guess I came from a sort of bar and restaurant background. But I'd been a passionate advocate for sake for about 20 years. So I was kind of one of the first, I guess, people to start sort of shouting about it. I mean, now there's many great people in Australia helping the cause. But I think because I was just by circumstance one of the early kind of dudes, talking about sake, educating people, running sake dinners. I think that got me the notice of the Japan Sake and Shochu Brewers Association, and I was honoured that they awarded me with Sake Samurai in 2013. It was kind of a bit of a shock, but kind of it's like, oh wow, cool,
Yeah.
Wow, yes. I didn't really even know about the program that much back then, so it was a very, very much a shock and an honour. But I guess it was because of that sort of 20 years of spreading the gospel.
That's impressive. 20 years is impressive. We always ask this to everyone we interview, and
boy.
How did you discover sake? What was your first experience with sake?
Without going into my life story, pretty much I was just into Japan since I was a kid. When I was young, we had American animation and we had Japanese dubbed animation on TV. And for me, the Japanese anime just seemed a little bit quirky. The characters were kind of just a little bit sort of odd, and the storylines were kind of strange. But I don't know, it just appealed to me as a kid. And then as I grew up in my teen years, I was a little bit of a geek. I was into computer games and technology, and it always seemed that stuff from Japan was always sort of following me along my life. I mean, I remember getting the first Sony Walkman and as a kid thinking, oh my God, I can ride my bike and I can listen to music. This is awesome. And I look on the back and it says, made in Japan. And so it was always this kind of, Japan always seemed to be there in my interest in life. And then when I was old enough to start going out eating and drinking, I went to some very early Japanese restaurants in Australia, and even then it was that thing of not having entree, mains and dessert. You got to order all these little things. And then certainly that was solidified with my first trip to Japan in 96. When I started going to real izakayas and then not only being exposed to a variety of different dishes and cuisines, but then that was my first discovery of jizaki, like local sake, because I was traveling out into the country.
Wow.
I had sake at restaurants in Australia in the kind of the late 90s. Early 90s. And but I didn't really think much about it, and I thought, okay, I'm in a Japanese restaurant. I've got Japanese food, so I should have sake. But I didn't really get into it that much. But it wasn't until '96 when my first trip to Japan, and then because I was out in sort of rural areas and going to those really local rustic izakayas, and then the master going, here, taste this, and this is from the brewery just down the road. I'm like, wow, this stuff's amazing. And so after that trip, when I got back to Australia, I thought, I need to tell everybody about this because this stuff is awesome. And then at that time, we only had about 6 or 8 different sakes coming to Australia in the late 90s. And so my first thing I did was get together some money and open up Australia's sort of kind of first sake bar. But even then, I only had a selection of about 8 sake. And then, it just went on from there.
Yeah. It's amazing what the impact of the countryside. There's something
Yes.
special there. There's a bit of added flavor that comes from that journey.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's something special about having sake right on site at the brewery. And especially like when you're actually talking to people who are behind the scenes of making it, it's just something special.
Right? I said that's why it's fun to be able to have to like sake. If there's something, it's almost a destination in and of itself. And so to be able, even if you
Absolutely.
can't get out
Yeah.
to the countryside, be able to come and do something like this and just spend the day out here.
And then
just
we have
yapping with
representation from
brewers and-
so many breweries that are kind of out in the way
Yeah.
that I would have otherwise not have come across. And it's just so good to be able to get to know the people, hear a little bit about the story. Granted, it is a bit of an outdoor flea market environment, so you only get to spend a couple of minutes with each brewer, but it's just a great experience to be able to have the mix and accessible here in the heart of Tokyo.
Right? Yeah, we're pretty lucky. We're pretty lucky. William,
Yes.
you're on tour.
I am on tour. I've done the countryside to the cities to Tokyo now.
You've brought your sake with you,
I have.
and you're doing the full tour for the first time.
First time. So now we're bringing our sake to pair with our sister brewery city by city and just getting people's feedback and introducing people to sake outside of Japan and kind of explaining the movement outside of Japan. It's almost the opposite of in Japan, where a lot of these breweries are trying to obtain new customers, and in the States at least, it's such a growing market. So it's been really good.
I like this idea. You said your sister brewery in Japan.
Yeah.
I love
You
the
twined or
idea of
something.
that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
So-
Who are we talking about?
Yeah,
What sort of relationship do you guys have?
Chiono Kame, they're based in Ehime, Uchiko, and so I have a brewer's assistant that helped them for a season. He came the week we opened, just knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I've spent the last 6 months in Japan brewing sake. Do you need a brewer?" And so it's been nice having him help out, and we've kind of nurtured that relationship, and that's what Japan's about, is relationships. So we finally gotten to the point where we said we should do something together. The promotion is more for them on this trip, to show that they're innovative and they're willing to go side by side with an American sake brewery. And we tried the other night, they're experimenting with bee yeast and wasp yeast and just trying to obtain new customers.
They got a great label. It's like a turtle on the label, but it's not like a picture of a turtle. It's almost like, how would you say, like kind of ingrained in the bottle.
Nice. How has the perception been? This is your first time bringing your sake to Japan?
Yeah, so we're explaining it in a way of, people in America don't really try sake until their 20s, and when they try it, they typically have a sweeter palate at that point because they grew up in America and they're drinking sugary drinks, and so sake can come off dry on that first couple sips, and it doesn't make you dive in, and there's not really advocates or samurais in the States as much, and so we have to have that educational step of, we're making a sake with a negative 14 SMV so that it's sweeter to the palate, it's more approachable for Americans. They try it, and hopefully it's a gateway into sake, because there's amazing stuff out there.
Is your work with Chiono Kame, or was there some sake that you found or experienced that kind of led you down sort of the type of sake you want to make? You said for the market, but a sweet sake. There's a lot of sweet sake out there. How did you guys settle upon what it is that you're making?
Yeah, so I worked in Japanese restaurants for about 5 years and tried numerous sakes and kind of fall in love with it. And you're like, wow, this one's dry and this one's floral, in your face, but they go with different parts of the meal. It's not like you just drink one sake and that's all you drink. And so we have a variety back home and in the tap room of sparkling, sour raspberry, barrel aged, whiskey barrel aged, trying different things. But we've noticed with the youth here is when they're trying our sake, they're really enjoying it. Like, wow, this is very easy to drink. And that's the goal, is we want it to be easy to drink so that you expand your palate moving forward.
I think it's good because I think you have more freedom maybe than the brewers in Japan
Yeah.
to really like explore the absolute limits
Right.
of what you can do with sake, and that's I really think the experimental kind of a bed, if you like, of sake is probably going to be the States and outside Japan, isn't it?
absolutely.
That's where
Yeah.
we're going to discover the potential maybe of sake for the future.
And if they add something like a fruit or a barrel age, then they can't call it sake,
right.
which is a huge.
But you don't have that pressure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's not Nihonshu or Seishu, the actual
Right.
like the word for sake here in Japan by law. So we still haven't found a word yet, have we? Really, for overseas sake, call it sake, or
No, and
overseas
it's
sake. Or,
and it's such a versatile product that you have to change things. You have to innovate the industry. If not, you're going to see a downspin. And
it's kind of like New World, isn't it?
Yeah,
In a way.
yeah.
If you-
Yeah, I was
if you want to-
amazed by one of your sake that had it was like the cinnamon and vanilla notes.
Right.
It was just something that I would have never considered, but when you tasted it, it was like, okay, wow,
How did you create that? Is that coming from the barrel aging or?
So that one's horchata, and we had cinnamon and vanilla on the secondary fermentation.
Oh.
And in America, the word nagori doesn't mean anything. They just want cloudy. They want something a little bit sweeter, and we want to provide that as well as provide them premium product. And that's what we're trying to do, right? You bring them into the tasting room and educate them. And every Saturday we do a Sake 101 class to educate people, because that's our biggest hurdle.
Nice. So I had a chance to try that the other day too, and it was excellent. And I said it tastes like cozy holiday fireplace lounging. That was the flavor
Yeah.
of that delicious horchata. That's gonna be like my new Christmas holiday beverage.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking Christmas drinks
Yeah.
as well when I tried it. Like I
right.
think I had it served cold. I think at the bar when I tried it, but I think the horchata can definitely be warmed up a little
Yeah.
bit.
yeah,
and
it's
would
the
make a-
new mulled wine.
it's the new mulled
Yeah.
wine.
Really?
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think overseas market is a great place to really push the envelope and experiment.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be, there's not as much tradition of brewing sake abroad, and you may at first have challenges because of the lack of support of the community. But still, I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to there not being a preconceived perception of what sake is and has to be. So, like you said earlier, you've got a raspberry and a barrel aged sake drink coming up, and all of that is just great stuff.
Yeah, and I think we were talking the other evening about French wine and how it's so intimidating to Americans, where they're like, this is Napa, this is California, it's familiar. And so we remove the Japanese verbiage to make it familiar. You pick it up and like, oh, it's sake, you should try it. Not you're intimidated, and it's gonna be tough educationally wise. And we spoke that maybe one day there won't be verbiage on a bottle to where this is a sweet sake, this is a dry sake, and junmai and daiginjo and things like that won't inhibit the consumer.
You were talking about. You said you do Sake 101 classes
Yeah.
pretty regularly every
Yeah.
week. Are those who's coming? Is it people coming into the bar, the how's that experience been?
We have people that they come into the tasting room or they work in restaurants and they just say, I want to know more. How do I do that? And if we need to take a step back and educate those people so they can be advocates for sake moving forward, I mean, it's only going to help us grow in the state of Colorado and hopefully beyond there grow. But it gets people to stand behind our product, and it gets people to understand when they buy sake what they're buying.
Andre, how are you? What are you up to on the education scene down?
Well,
in
yeah,
your
I guess
hemisphere?
just like William. I mean, I've been involved over the years in running those kind of Sake 101s, or because I've got my own venues, I tend to use sake dinners a lot because I think, I mean, for me, I enjoy sake most when I'm having it with food, and so I really love using the tool of offering customers, okay, you're going to get this wonderful degustation menu, and then you're going to get to try some, beautiful sake. And I think for Australians, that's a really easy way to understand, because everybody's been drinking wine for so long, and everybody is getting obsessed about mariage and pairings. So for me, that's a really easy hook. I get them in as diners, and then then it's the sake. And so I do that on various different scales. So sometimes I do, say, bigger events for the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, big international film festival, where we'll have a particular theme. So I've done stuff on sustainable seafood, or one of the most successful dinners I did was with an Australian cheese master called Will Stuart, and we did a whole dinner just cheese and sake. So those kind of events went really well. But then we have a little tatami room where sometimes I just advertise I'm going to do an intimate dinner with 10 people, and over the course of the evening I'm going to run through a sake education. So I really enjoy doing that. And also a couple of seasons ago I actually worked in Japan as a brewer for Shotoku Shuzo down in Fushimi, Kyoto, and then after that I worked at Dasai for a month. And also having that experience brewing, and then bringing that into my education as well, and being able to tell people about my adventures and stories at breweries. I think that really helps with education as well. And I'm sure William, being a brewer as well, when you're educating, actually telling little anecdotes about, when this happened, and
it enriches the education.
Exactly.
It makes it interesting, because on the very kind of surface level, sake can sometimes be a little bit, I'm not going to say boring, but for people who never yet to discover sake, I think it's possible it could come across as a little bit, like there's a lot of technical stuff, but yeah, when you start talking about telling stories about how different brewers brew the sake, and how they live together during the brewing season, and have all these different traditions and things, sigidama, and then it starts to get really interesting. And then there's a lot of Japanese culture that kind of comes in there as well, and that's what hooked me in the first place. So it's kind of
Yeah, I mean, and it's a good point about that sort of the stories. I mean, early on when I started talking to brewers, and at one stage I was actually contracted by the Aoyama Prefecture government to do a lecture for their brewers down in Aoyama in Kurashiki City, and I was telling the brewers, because they're all saying about, how do we taste profiles and packaging, and we're going through a whole load of different things, and I was saying, the thing for a Western person who can't read Japanese, and that's been the curse of my sake industry, is I'm still not fluent in Japanese. But when exporters export, I mean, they don't think about where it's going in the market and who's going to look at the label. So I was saying, please, you still have your beautiful Japanese labels, but on the back, get someone to tell your story, and stick it on the back. So when it goes into a restaurant, a server can read that and then tell the story to the customer, or when it's in a retail store, the customer can pick up the bottle, tell them about the rice, tell them about your family, tell them about some little thing about this sake, because a story helps sell.
Exactly.
And
relatable stories,
yes,
right?
Yeah, and I was really, that was a big part of my push in the discussion in packaging for the overseas market.
It's such an area that gets, I won't say overlooked, but it kind of it just, I think it's difficult. It is actually a difficult kind of challenge as well, but it is an area which doesn't get quite enough attention, I don't think. Not just overseas, but here in Japan as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As sake professionals and as communicators, all of us here, I think it's one of the most important things that we're doing is to really build a bridge between the consumer and then the stories behind what happens behind making sake. I mean, when you tell someone who's not too familiar with sake, well, this is rice polishing rate of 50%, and this rice, and that's this kind of water. It's all useful information, but it doesn't really spark anything in their head. You're thinking, okay, well, rice is milled down to this percent, but how is it actually milled, and then what happens, like who's growing the rice and where, and what's the story behind wanting to make this product. And when you start to kind of flesh out the story and make it a more relatable story, you see that the audience, the consumer's reaction is just really different.
It is, and the problem is the thing that the exporters. It's very difficult for the exporters to actually make these labels, put these labels on the bottles, and the breweries can't really do it. So when I was working in London for
they
an
can, they're just
importer.
not.
Sorry.
They can. It's not hard. You just have to ask somebody.
Yeah.
It's a percent.
It is,
It's
but
what
it's
you were
very
saying.
frustrating because when I was working for an importer in London, I ended up having to make all the labels myself. I made an entire database full of labels, and I got my warehouse to print them. Well, I printed them out, and got my warehouse to stick them on the bottles. And I recently met someone from London who's working in London, and I just asked them. I said, "What labels do you have on the the bottles of the importer I was working for?" And they said, "The ones that you made." Still the ones that you made.
Yeah.
They haven't changed them. They haven't refreshed them.
Well, I
It's
think
getting a bit old.
I mean, my understanding, I think in the US it's a little harder because you have to get all the labels registered and approved.
Yeah.
In Australia, we don't need to do that. There are certain design guidelines. But for example, I mean, one of the other hats I wear, I'm an importer for Dasai as well for the Australian market. And even with a prestigious company like Dasai, I mean, we knew that we had to redesign the label for the Australian market. And so with a great explanation and a story, and I mean, there were some labelling requirements that we had to do for the Australian liquor licensing laws. But yeah, I mean, it was basically, okay, I'm bringing this in, I've got to develop a label for the market, and something that that everybody will be able to read and understand. And I just think that it seems to be overlooked so many times by brewers and importers and exporters because they just ship the product. I mean, I'm just talking to the Australian market. They just ship the product and it just has the address of the importer and that's it. So anybody that picks up that bottle, whether they be in a bar or a restaurant or at retail, are just going to go, okay, I can't read this. I don't know what this is. And, basically the story ends there. So, yeah.
Getting back to the idea of a story, so for Maria, for William, so for those who don't know, Maria, you spent a significant stint down at Zenkuro, down in
Queenstown, New Zealand.
In Queenstown, right? And then, of course, being based in Colorado. When we're talking about stories, the story that producers overseas that are just getting into this are going to be very, very different from the stories that Japanese producers are able to reach back into. They're able to reach back into millennia worth of archives in order to concoct what they're what they want to communicate and what they want to share. When you're thinking about the story, what it is you're trying to communicate, and you're talking about it's important to simplify communication as well. But what is the story when it comes to, say, Colorado Sake or Zenkuro, or what are the things that sort of inform what it is you want to communicate about sake that is the story of a place that only has a history of 3 or 4 years or something like that,
At best.
What is there?
So I brew the sake, and then I also work the tasting room on the weekend. Just we're a small company. I can't afford anyone to do that, so I'm working all the time. But everyone that comes in says, "Why sake? What's your story?" And you have to simplify it for people, and you just say, "I love sake and wanted to make sake for myself, and it's a great product. Most people don't know that it's just rice, and there's no added sugar, and it's a great product, and you should drink it." And then people go from there. If they want to ask more questions, they can. If they want to know more about rice milling, and you have to simplify it. Rice is a sugar that becomes alcohol. You have to be as open as possible to people so that they have a better understanding of what sake is.
Yeah. How about down in New Zealand? Was there anything in particular, or about about
sure.
Zenkuro, or just about sake down there in general?
I'll speak on behalf of my friend Dave Joel, who actually runs the Kura. I hope
get him
Dave's
on here
listening to this. So the idea of Zenkuro, I think, came really organically to Dave. Obviously, I'm speaking on his behalf, but he's been involved in the tourism industry, catering to Japanese people down there, and he himself has spent decades of time living and working here in Japan. So he'd always had a huge love and passion to Japan, and therefore to sake, very much the way that you did, Andre. So when he moved to Queenstown, it just kind of came up naturally that he one day wanted to take advantage of the beautiful pristine water and then the cold sake brewing friendly climate that they had in Queenstown, and to try to make something that was paying an homage to both his heritage as a Kiwi and his love for Japan. And I was just very fortunate to be able to do a year-long internship at the Kura, just learning about different phases sake production, really, because we're such a micro operation. You get to do and kind of have to do everything by yourselves, right? So.
Nice. There you go. That sounds really nice. Maybe it's me not being from New Zealand, and so I just, for me, it's kind of fantasy as well too. But, like,
but you've spent
it's
quite
beautiful.
a lot of time in New Zealand
I have
as
been
well.
There. I have
yeah.
been there, but it's still, for me, it's still it's a destination, right? So
Justin
the idea
has an
the
image of
beautiful-
Lord of the Rings in his head.
But it's also a great place to produce and promote sake as well, because they have a very strong and big wine drinking culture and industry. So people are very open-minded when we try to draw some parallels, but also try to contrast between sake and wine. Instantaneously, a lot of people are kind of intrigued and interested. So they're very, very open, I think, to giving it a go down in New Zealand.
So I like you brought up the idea of tourism. You said Dave was involved in tourism for a long time. As New Zealand, Australia, as far as wine tourism, I mean, they're relatively young wine industries, but have incredible wine tourism industries. Is that something that in Australia or even I don't know about in the U.S. I mean, you're in Colorado, so it's it's not Napa, but but is that something that places are looking to integrate with? Is that something, the idea of tourism, or people coming to visit, making sake part of a destination
I think,
or experience?
I'd gone down this road of wanting to open a brewery, and
then walked back the other way down the road, and then
I guess at the height of the frenzy, I'd hired a warehouse, I'd hired a space, I got plans drawn up, and I mean it was going to be an inner city brewery. I mean I wanted to, because there was a couple of craft beer breweries popping up around. It was in a cool neighbourhood of Melbourne, and so I kind of went head on into this. I'm going to open up a sake brewery, and then it's kind of. I sort of, before I had to start sort of writing checks for equipment, I literally had an epiphany and thought, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing? I love talking about sake. I love educating people on sake, but I don't want to be stuck in a brewery all day, because it's a hard life. And after doing a season in Japan, I have just the utmost respect for Toji and Kurobito, the worldwide, because it's not an easy craft. But I did have that vision of, okay, I'm going to have this cool inner city brewery, and it's going to be a tourist destination. And I imagine sort of jumping on to the other like beer breweries and have a beer and sake crawl around the breweries, and so I kind of had that vision that it would be good for tourism. It would be Australia's first. I mean, we do have one sake brewery in Australia, which is a collaboration with a Japanese brewer, but they're more of a commercial operation. So I thought, I'll be the first, craft sake brewer in Australia.
Still not there.
No. I literally just surrendered the lease a couple of months ago. I had the lease for 10 years, and I rented it out to a lady who turned my brewery into a cat hotel. True story. And I just recently surrendered the lease because I thought, well, I'll just keep it, and maybe one day I'll change my mind. But no, I'm much happier on the other side of the sake fence. But I do have the utmost respect for brewers and brewing staff. But I'm sure I have heard rumours that other people down in Australia will pick up that baton and run with it. I think there are, I've heard rumours on the mill that there are a few people looking into maybe doing a craft brewery down in Australia. So. It won't be too long before it happens, but it won't be me. I'll be very happy to talk about it when they finish making it. But I'll leave that craft up to guys like William, who've got a lot more stamina than I have.
Everyone talks about when they talk about they're thinking about the tourism part. They're talking about wine tourism and things, but you have an incredible craft beer scene in your corner of.
Yeah, Colorado has 400 breweries, 300 wineries, 150 distilleries. It's wow. Yeah, there's a lot of alcoholics, and so we had to do some legislation issues to exist, and now we're categorized with wine, and so it gives us the ability to do wine festivals and festivals all over the state, which have a huge following. So it allows people to discover that we exist. They have like coupon books now for wineries and breweries, and so we're part of those, which drives people in. They're like, sake, why is nobody else doing this? And you're like, because you have to be crazy to do it. the amount of work and effort is, even when you start with a test batch, you're like, every day you're testing it, and you absolutely have to be crazy to do this. But it's because we love what we do. So hopefully we see more pop up, and it just brings more education. Hopefully they're good. We've had a lot of people just want to do it for business reasons, and you want people to do it for the right reasons, because they love sake, right?
So
There are easier ways to make money.
Where's the States ranked on the alcohol consumption per capita?
I would imagine it's pretty high.
Yeah, because I think Australia, we're about 19, so we're I think we're just under France, but we're putting a bit away. We're holding our own.
Well, you have a massive wine, scene as well. You have a massive wine, culture. You one of the first kind of countries to explore this kind of concept of New World wine, weren't you?
I just wonder where the US sits, because when you're talking about all those breweries and distilleries in the one state of Colorado, that's a lot of alcohol production just in the state of Colorado.
Yeah. It's high. California is the same, but then there's states that aren't as progressive that hold people back. Alabama was 2 years ago. Now you can start home brewing at your house. Before that, it was illegal. So each state by state, but there's a lot of alcohol consumed in the United States.
It's still the biggest market for sake for the time being, anyway.
And it's going to continue with we have to project things for investors, and year after year it's 12% growth, 12% growth, and it's beer is 2%, wine is 3%, liquor is 3%. So 12% is high, even though it's still 0.01% of the alcohol.
It's a big increase
consumed.
on a very, very small.
Right.
Very small. You're starting very, very small.
It won't be long. It won't be long until China catches up with you, though. China is becoming a very big market for sake.
Chiyo no Kame, one of their biggest markets is China. They have freights come by, pick up sake, and it's gone.
You'll hear that a lot from most brewers.
So you guys spent a couple weeks in Japan?
Yeah.
Right. What's any exciting discoveries, or what's got you excited at the moment now that you're in Japan? Anything you found that you want to bring back home, whether it's some of those stories or tasty beverages, or
what have you been Instagramming about?
I've been too busy and too tired to do much Instagram this trip, but I need to catch up. I need to do some latergram. There's going to be a lot of latergram when I got time. But I don't know, for me, one of the other projects I've got in the line, I'm trying to get the Australian International Sake Awards up and running, because I think it's about time that Australia, represented as far as some sake evaluation and what Aussies like to drink. So I've kind of put that out there, and I'm been talking to a few people about, I've got the idea, but I need to get what are the systems used in Japan, and so I've been talking to a few people, and yet to talk to some people about how I can bring that together. But that's kind of a passion project that I've got going at the moment.
Exciting.
Nice. It's kind of pushing that along while you've been here.
Yeah, well, it's just, it's something that I thought that I really wanted to see in Australia, and I sort of didn't see anybody else sort of putting their hand up, so I thought, I'll put my hand up for that, because I just need another thing to do at the moment. But
it's a great stage to kind of evaluate potential new breweries, that could maybe conquer different parts of the market that maybe haven't been introduced to sake yet.
Yeah, we've just had a kind of a sake festival, our first sort of sake festival up and running for the last couple of years, and I've just joined that as an importer now, so that kind of these sake events are starting to happen, and I think that if you have an award attached to a festival, it just gives it a little bit more impact, and people take a little bit more interest. So I'm always thinking of ways that I can put sake up in the spotlight and get more people noticing it. So that's been a little bit of a research project for me this trip.
How many people do you get coming to the festivals, or are you expecting?
I think it's in the hundreds. I mean, it's not kind of in the thousands, but it's hundreds. And I think at the moment we're just running in Melbourne and Sydney. Yeah, so the next one will be in June this year. So it's the Sake Matsuri. So that'll be in June, and then I think in Melbourne, and then in October, I think in Sydney.
You heard it, folks.
There it is.
And there it is.
There it is. How about you, sir? Well, what you got? Anything you're taking home with you, or anything that?
It was nice to visit breweries to see how different each one is and what they're doing differently and why they claim they're doing things differently than the other one, and it'd just be nice to go back and do some more test batches, figure things out. The food has been incredible. Everything's great. So it's this country is awesome.
Well, excellent, gentlemen. I said we should probably this festival's getting underway here. I think we'll maybe turn some music on and get the party started here. We'll go have a few drinks and we'll come back this afternoon. Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to come in and chat with us.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Thank you so much.
We'll give us a holler next time you're in town. We'll set up camp somewhere else and we'll come up with something another fun topic of interest.
And we need to talk more about that Sake on Air Oz tour.
I'm totally into that. I'm fully into that.
Down.
I said we kind of allude to the ideas of that sort of thing on past episodes. Like, what if we just kind of took this on tour?
Exactly.
And people seem to say yes, please do that.
Yeah.
So that sounds
with,
like
with all the international markets growing, we have so many talented, brilliant, successful people in each respective markets. And I think whether it be an Oz tour or not, I think it'll be a great opportunity for us, if possible, to go out there and connect with these people and shine some light.
Right? I said it would be fun to. Oh gosh, see now I'm thinking about things again. Where's it?
The wheels are turning.
I can hear the cogs from
You hear
here.
the cogs turning, can't you?
Nice. I like the idea of touring, taking some of the. I mean, something like this, taking a bunch of really good food and some good chefs and some good music and some. I don't know. I don't know what we would bring to the table, but we would bring a couple microphones and some tasty beverage, and it'd probably work out in everyone's best interest in one way or another.
I'm sure you have lots of people volunteering as a roadie as well.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out, and enjoy your time here at Aoyama Sake Flea, and let's go grab a drink.
Kanpai.
Excellent.
Kanpai, yeah.
Kanpai it is.
Bye.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We love getting messages from our listeners, so please reach out to us at questions@sakeonair.com. Reviews are one of the main ways we're able to grow, so if you have a moment, please do share some kind words. It really helps the show like you wouldn't believe. Sake on Air is regularly broadcasted from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center, and made possible by the generous support of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association. It is a joint production between Potsuke Productions and Export Japan. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. Kanpai!